So hello, everyone. Welcome to the dkNET office hours. I'm Ko-Wei Lin, and I'm the host of today's office hour. For those who are new to dkNET, haven't heard about dkNET, dkNET is a research resource information portal founded by NIDDK. We provide several services, including resources and the tools that support rigor and reproducibility. We also help researchers discover useful research resources and keep up to date on new tools and service. We have the Hypothesis Center to assist researchers in generating hypotheses, and the Fair Data Management Service to help you to make your data fair. So for more information, please visit dknet.org. So a few announcements before starting the office hour. To join the dkNET community, you can check the news on the dkNET homepage or follow us through the social media like X or Facebook, or subscribe newsletter to receive upcoming webinar information or updated information from the community. So today it's our pleasure to have Dr. Jeffrey Grethe join us during this office hour session. Dr. Grethe is currently the principal investigator for the NIDDK Information Network, dkNET, and he's also associate director in the Center for Research in Biological Systems at the University of California, San Diego. He received a Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics from University of California, Irvine, followed by a PhD in Neurosciences with a specialized in Informatics and Computational Modeling from the University of Southern California. So after completing a postdoc position at Emory University, where he worked on image technology, Dr. Grethe transitioned to the University of California, San Diego as part of the Biomedical Informatics Research Network, where he was the executive director of the coordinating center. Through his career, Dr. Grethe has been actively involved in fostering collaborative research, promoting data sharing, and driven innovation through advanced informatics approaches. His contributions have extended beyond dkNET to projects such as Cyclone Platform, the Open Data Commons for Spinal Cord Injury and the Traumatic Brain Injury, and the SPARC. This project aimed to establish fair data platform for researchers. So without any further ado, let's welcome Dr. Jeffrey Grethe. And Jeff, over to you.
Okay, so good morning or afternoon, everyone. So again, what we're going to be talking about today is, the NIH data management and sharing mandate. Everyone should be familiar that is now in place, but Ko-Wei gave a little bit of an overview of dkNET. So we have just entered the next phase of dkNET. So as Ko-Wei mentioned, dkNET has started out as a web resource to connect researchers to resources, and those resources can be anything from data, information about reagents, model organisms, antibodies, and we've also focused heavily in the prior phases on rigor and reproducibility, and also on the fair data principles. In this next phase of dkNET, there is a little restructuring in that the current dkNET services around the resources, the fair data services, rigor reproducibility are now wrapped into a resource core, and we're adding a new computational core, which is going to build out some computational services and AI ML methods for the DK community. We'll also have a new outreach core where we're going to be bringing together a community board, to help with use case development. And again, so this is something that has, is only a couple months old. So, we've just entered this next phase of dkNET, but check back with us, because there'll be some exciting things happening on the computational side, especially with regards to, development of, some new AI ML methods that we can make available to the community. Okay, so as Ko-Wei mentioned, there are a number of different areas where dkNET provides information to researchers, and what we're going to be focusing on today is the data management sharing plan, but also these fair data resources that we make available as you are ready to publish your results. Now, the new NIH policy went into effect last year, so January 25th of 2023. And the new policy really outlines that, and stresses that all data should be managed and most data should be shared, and that this data that is shared should be shared as open as possible and as closed as necessary. And I'll talk a little bit about that, down the road. And the way to document, your plans for this is in a new data management and sharing plan. So if you remember the, prior NIH submissions required, a resource sharing plan, and that still is, needed for, if you're sharing resources such as antibodies, cell lines, model organisms, or if you're developing software, or if you have genomic data, right? Those separate plans are still required, but for the data sharing, there is a new specific data management and sharing plan. Within the documentation of the plan, they do actually include information as to what constitutes data, and so this is really the data that is of sufficient quality to validate and replicate the research findings. And this is regardless of whether the data are used to support scholarly publications. So in the past, a number of journals have asked researchers to include information about where the data for a publication may be found. In the new information, there is also the need to share data if even if a publication has been made. And so this is sometimes what's called dark data or negative data. So for example, if a hypothesis doesn't pan out, and data was generated around testing that hypothesis, but no publication comes out from that, there is the need to share that data as well, potentially. And then they also explain what scientific data is not. And so laboratory notebooks, preliminary analysis, drafts of papers, all of these other things are not considered to be data. So the main change here really is data that is not linked to a publication. Now, the specification also describes, when data should be shared, and so data should be made as soon as possible, and so that is no later than the time of an associated publication. So if you're publishing research a paper, the data that's associated with that paper needs to be made available at the time of publication or at the end of the award support period. So if again there is some data that hasn't been associated with a publication, that will need to be made available at the end of the award. And again, you can share data at various times. You can share data early. So really that's up to, how you want to share and publish your data. And that's going to depend on, the funding, the studies, that you have described in your proposals. Where to share data, NIH encourages the use of established repositories to the extent possible, and we'll cover that down the road. How to share the data. And again, this is, data management and sharing practice consistent with the FAIR data principles. We'll talk a little bit about FAIR in a couple of minutes. And another important change is funding. So usually with NIH awards, you're not allowed to spend money in a current fiscal year that pays for services in fiscal years down the road. However, for data sharing and data preservation, through this new mandate, you are allowed to pay for any repository fees or data preservation fees that extend beyond the period of the award. So that is something new. And just like with other NIH mandates, there are repercussions if there is non-compliance with the plan. That can be taken into account by NIH for future funding decisions. Now, again, this is something that will generate data sets associated with publications. And an important thing to keep in mind is that this also starts treating data as a core research product. So just as you publish a paper, you get a DOI for that paper, people can cite that paper. The same thing with data sets. So most repositories will provide a DOI just like you get for your manuscripts. You'll get one for your data. That can be cited just like a paper. So if someone reuses the data, or for example, does a study bringing data together from multiple studies, they can cite, the data sets using the DOIs that have been used. And, just as tracking citations for journal articles, you can track citations for data sets as well. And again, a data citation looks just like a regular citation. So here's an example from one of the repositories Ko-Wei mentioned early. You have the DOI, and then there's a dataset citation, which looks very similar, to a journal citation, except at the very end, instead of having journal information, it has information about the dataset accession number at the repository. And again, if you have these DOIs and they get cited, things like Google and other things can start tracking citations of these data sets. Now, one of the key takeaways from the new mandate is that they do stress data management, and so good data management is the gateway to prepare for data sharing. In the past, when one didn't have to prepare data to be shared and published through a repository, ad hoc methods potentially, were fine, and that, after the study was completed, there was no specific format or submission template that had to be used, to submit the data. And so, these ad hoc plans, per study were, didn't have a negative impact. But now, as one has to prepare data, for submission to repositories, having, good data management policies, good data management plans, so, that the data, as it's being collected, as it's being analyzed, is already being structured in ways that, are useful, for the sharing of that data down the road, becomes more critical and also saves time and money. The other important aspect of good data management is the metadata associated with the data that's being collected. It's important to make sure that this data is being collected, at the start of collection of data, because at the end, when you have to make that data available, going back and, trying to find metadata, if it's buried in, lab notebooks or other places, or if you didn't collect that information, maybe much more difficult to collect at the end. So again, developing data management practices in the lab is a critical step, to making this data publication sharing easier. And there are a lot of benefits, for data management and the sharing of data, and most of them relate not to potentially others who may be using your data from the repository, but it is within the lab itself and within your research sphere. So being able to benefit from data that's been collected. So if you're, for example, collecting certain types of imaging data, as you collect data from more and more subjects, and you have, for example, control subjects, you internally in the lab are building a much larger cohort of normal data, of normative data that could be used down the road if it gets combined, for example. And it also makes data sharing and collaboration much easier. So there are good data management practices. Being able to share data with collaborators, explain the data with collaborators is much simpler. But then again, how do we do all this? So again, NIH mentions the FAIR principles and using established repositories. So FAIR, so hopefully most people have heard about FAIR. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And so these are guidelines for how data should be structured and how metadata, should be structured and included to make data usable, in the broader context. And this is not just for researchers, who are, looking to access data, but as AI/ML techniques grow and more of them become available, this will also be needed for, these AI/ML techniques to be run against much larger data sets and even across data sets, right? Now, when you look at the actual, aspects of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, there seems to be a lot of requirements, but it basically comes down to three core things that we've already talked about. One, findable if you're using a repository that is known and is established and is recommended, they will generate, and most of them will generate a DOI for your data. So, and they also take care of the findability. So using an appropriate repository really helps you take care of the findable and accessible aspects of your data. Now, interoperable and reusable, that gets a little more difficult in the sense that this is really driven by the metadata. So for example, if one has a spreadsheet of data, in terms of, outcome measures that's been collected, that you've used in a paper to, do your statistics and generate some graphs, right? You have information that needs to be used to describe that data, and this is where metadata comes in. So, for example, in clinical data, there's the use of common data elements, right, to specify, what a specific variable, in the data is, right? And so, having rich enough metadata to understand, what is there is critically important for the reusability and interoperability of the data, so that if there are multiple studies, collecting information, that they have documentation that allows people to align those data sets if necessary. So as we mentioned, the resource sharing plan is now the data management and sharing plan. They have a number of required elements. Now, one of the important things and one of the new things, the resource sharing plan and the resource sharing plan still is visible to reviewers. So, if you're describing, the software sharing or sharing of organisms, that is actually part of the review process. So reviewers will see that. The new DMSP is not part of review. So basically, this is not available to reviewers at time of review. It is something that will be reviewed by NIH at the time that an award is being considered. So as part of the just-in-time process, in that time frame. And so, the DMSP is something that is going to be agreed upon by you, your university, and NIH. And so it actually becomes part of, the award contract itself. And so this is something that is new. So before it was part of the proposal, but it was not, then lifted into, any of the award documentation. With the DMSP, it is. So it is critical that, these are well described and that you, communicate with, the program officials, for an award, if anything changes. So there are official ways to update and change approved data management sharing plan. So again, that has to be submitted, by your university to NIH if you want to make official changes to that plan. Now, in terms of the required elements, there are a set of required elements. We'll go through them fairly quickly. But the first aspect is describing the data types that you will be collecting. Is you're collecting imaging data, you're collecting, microscopy or MRI. Is there other types of, is there electrophysiology data being collected? So basically, this is to help you organize information about the types of data being collected, and more importantly, the amount and size of data, right? So if there are very large data sets, there are some extremely large data sets, right? They're going to have to be additional concerns, incorporated into the data management sharing plan as to what should be shared and where can it be shared. For very large data sets, there are only a few repositories that would accept that type of data. And this is where you'll be describing again which data and why, and then also a brief listing of the metadata associated with that. So that is describing the data types themselves. The next thing is describing standards. So as you collect the data, want to make sure that, the data is in a standard that is usable by others. So not locked in to a vendor, for example, data format that no one can access unless they purchase software from the vendor. So for imaging formats, this is, for example, converting data, into, OME format, as one example. For electrophysiology data, things like NWB, there's some other potential standards. What types of data dictionaries, are going to be used for data identifiers? So if it's human data, are there going to be identifiers provided by, for example, NIH has a globally unique ID system for human subjects. And other documentation around quality assurance and control. So again, this is another section that needs to be detailed, but really gets to information about how this data is going to be made available to others. And again, if you're using a repository, many repositories require submission of data using certain standards. So again, making sure to know what repositories you are going to be using is important. And there are other aspects in terms of figuring out information for data. So, through dkNET, we provide links to something called fairsharing.org. And that is a EU funded, so through the EU informatics activities, bioinformatics activities. So fair sharing is part of that group of funding, and they maintain a database of standards and policies. And also for databases, if you look at a database within fair sharing, it will also give you information about the standards being used there. Now, another section we'll talk about related tools, software, and code. And so this is really where you document, is there any specialized tools needed to access and manipulate the shared data, to manipulate data to be shared. And so here, really this gets to proprietary formats, other issues with software, that is needed to access the data. How can those tools be accessed? Are those tools going to be available to others? And, are there costs to that? And so, this is a place where you would describe any particular aspects of, the tools in our software that are being used that are needed for access to the data. Oops. The next section talks about data preservation, access, and associated timelines. So here, you will be specifying, the name of the repository or repositories that will be used, how the data, will be findable and identifiable. And again, if you're using one of the suggested data repositories, an approved data repositories from NIH, they will take care of that. Usually it's just saying that, this data set will be issued a DOI or an accession number from this repository. And that is that. And then the timeline. So describing how you plan to share data over the time of the award. Now, one thing I've mentioned, and again, this is something that's very important, is to think about your data will end up in the beginning. And so, again, best practice is submit your data to a repository specialized for the type of data or for your domain. So a lot of repositories are, based on data modalities. So, for example, electrophysiology, imaging, genomic data. There are others that are focused on domains. So, like the NIDDK clinical repository, right? So, clinical studies that are funded by NIDDK. And so that's the two main axes in terms of how repositories are broken down. And then there's also a third category of repositories, and that's if there isn't a specialized repository for the data type or your domain, there are also general purpose repositories, such as Dryad. And for example, for clinical data, there's also Vivli. And so this is part of what's called NIH's GREI initiative, and it's GREI. So the General Repository Ecosystem Initiative, I believe, is what that stands for. Now, with dkNET, we've worked with NIDDK to develop a list of DK relevant repositories that are recommended by NIH, NLM, and various journals. And so this is a place where you can explore, data repositories that might be useful, for hosting your data. And again, if you're not finding something here that matches what you have, there again, the generalist repositories, or you can also contact us, for assistance, and we'll gladly work with you. Now, there are other aspects for data sharing, and so these are access, distribution, and reuse considerations. So in addition to sort of the FAIR principles, there's also the CARE principles, right? And so these CARE principles really talk about access considerations around responsibility for handling the data well, ethics around use of the data, and also any authority in terms of restrictions to the data. And so this is information that needs to be included, specifically and importantly with human subjects data. So, information about informed consent, privacy confidentiality protections, will the data be controlled, or will a de-identified data set be made available? There are also other restrictions, imposed by federal and state laws, by tribal laws, and regulations and policies. And are there any other considerations, that may limit the extent of data sharing? And, with those, core sections that have to be filled out, there is assistance for this. So there are templates that exist online. Universities are developing templates, and NIDDK has, some documentation and templates available. There is tools such as the DMP tool, which is an online tool developed originally by the California Digital Library that will also, help guide you through the development, of a data management sharing plan. And again, within dkNET, we have a section of our website, that provides links to a number of these resources. And again, the data management sharing plan, is new and, does require additional effort. However, the planning, especially as collection of data continues to grow and the size of data collection continues to grow, it really helps plan ahead for a study, because dealing with data, can be a cost driver, especially if large scale data is being collected, and also there are human resources required for collecting appropriate metadata, and ensuring that data is appropriately formatted for submission to repositories. And so the organization of the data and the metadata is going to be beneficial down the road. And then using these standards over time also lowers development cost around, for example, developing, just quick example, QA QC methods in the lab, right? So if you have standardized ways of collecting and structuring the data, if one of your postdocs develops a QA QC metric across some of the data that you're collecting, be it imaging data or electrophysiology data, right? If it's in a structured format, those methods can be easily applied to other data sets collected down the road, so that tools don't have to be rewritten, based on how an individual, researcher, postdoc, graduate student is collecting and structuring their data. So I know a lot of people feel overwhelmed with all these new requirements. But again, this is a partnership, right? So, as a researcher, again, the focus should be really on good data management and providing, the rich metadata so that the data is being prepared to be shared with a repository. The repositories themselves, they provide, the tools, to support the future access to that data, providing persistent identifiers, providing, APIs and other things around your data. And then, projects like dkNET, are there to help sort of navigate, these new mandates and also assist in, pointing people in the right direction in terms of repositories, standards, and the like. So within dkNET, we do have our section on getting help with the NIDDK management and sharing plan. Again, we have the resource page I've mentioned that lists a whole number of resources available to you, for these DMS plans. And one of the key things that you notice on the slide is one of the first resources we point to is the NIDDK website, and so NIDDK has a number of resources as well in terms of DMS plan examples, selecting a data repository, and the like. So again, we're here to help and ensure that the data is made useful. One of the tools that we'll be releasing soon is a repository wizard, which will also help guide you through selection of a repository. So in addition to the web page that I mentioned earlier, we'll be making sort of an online tool available for people as well. And as Ko-Wei mentioned, we're here to help. There are a number of ways to get engaged with us. And those are all on the homepage. So thank you, and gave a real brief overview, but leaving time for people's questions and comments.